How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Daf 94 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, Daf 94 is a unique daf. It's a memorable daf, I think. It's a little bit of a tricky isn't the right word. We're trying to describe things that we need to see. Anyway, okay. Today we begin the 11th parak of Masechta Menachos, parak shtei halechem. We begin parak shtei halechem today. Now, the first section of today's daf, we're going to discuss baking the shtei halechem and the lechem hapanim. Okay, very interesting. Now, the second part of today's daf is going to be discussing the shape of the lechem hapanim. The lechem hapanim, of course, being the showbreads, the 12 showbreads that were baked every week and were swapped out every Shabbos. That is going to be a big part of this parak. Now, when discussing the showbreads, so first of all, there's the question is, what were the actual shape of the showbreads? That's going to be a machlokas that we're going to see today. It gets pretty technical, and part of the discussion of the showbreads is also then going to lead into discussion of the shulchan. Now, these are things that we're going to be discussing really over the course of the next few days. The shulchan, of course, being the table in the heichal that the showbreads were stacked on. And we're going to be discussing the showbreads and trying to understand and work through the shape, what were the shape of the showbreads, that is also connected to understanding how they were stacked on the shulchan, on the table. So it's gonna lead into I don't know if it's not quite a rabbit hole, but we're gonna be working through different shapes, and the part of the challenge here is that we're trying to visualize things that are abstract and at times very difficult to visualize, and figure out how all these little details work together. So it's a pretty interesting challenge, and we're gonna have some slides to support us. We're gonna working through a lot of I don't even know, a lot of this ways and that ways in trying to determine the shape of the showbread. So it's going to be a very interesting daf. I think a memorable daf. I prepared a whole bunch of slides that I hope will give us something to work with over here. Without slides, I think it's impossible. So anyways, it could be a really fun daf. I hope it will be a really fun daf. Friends, let's jump in to Daf Tzadi Daled, Daf 94 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, we begin on Daf Tzadi Daled, Amid Aleph, at the new parak. Probably about 3/5. 3/5 is 60% of the way down the daf. Says the Mishnah at the beginning of parak shtei halechem, shtei halechem. What are the shtei halechem? Who could tell me? Excuse me. Who could tell me what the shtei halechem are? Shtei halechem, of course, are offered on Shavuos. As of this recording, it is, I believe, the 13th day of the Omer. Shavuos is coming up in, let's see, 49 minus 13, 49 minus 13, 49 minus 13, 49, 36, 49 minus 13. Yeah, 36? What do you guys think? 36, huh? 30, yeah, it sounds about right. Should be around 36 days from now. Shavuos. Although it's technically the 50th day, maybe 37 days from now. Hapanim. On Shavuos. Hopefully this year, we missed out on the Korban Omer, but it's not too late for the shtei halechem. Hopefully this year we'll be offering the shtei halechem, the Beis HaMikdash. The shtei halechem were 2 loaves of wheat. 2 loaves of wheat bread that were chametz, and they were offered on Shavuos. Now, the shtei halechem, niloshes achas, they are kneaded one at a time. The shtei halechem, of course, were shtei asronim, 2 isarons. Now, 2 isarons total for 2 breads. That comes out to 1 isaron per bread. Now, we did not knead together the 2 isarons. There was no oil. I don't believe there was any oil for the shtei halechem, but it was kneaded with water. It was chametz. So it was kneaded. The flour and the water were kneaded together. We did not knead together to both esronims and then divide it in half. Each one is kneaded separately. 1 isaron is kneaded, and baked separately. So it sounds to me like basically you would need 1 isaron of dough, bake it, need the next isaron of dough, and bake that. They were kneaded separately, they were baked separately. Shtei lechem niloshos achas, achas v'nefos achas achas. Lechem hapanim. When it comes to the 12 showbreads, the 12 weekly showbreads, those were not chametz, those were matzah. They were wheat, but they were wheat flour, but they were matzah. Lechem hapanim niloshis. Well, they at least weren't chametz. Whether they weren't quite rakikin, they weren't quite the matzahs that we eat, but they were unleavened. Lechem hapanim niloshis achas achas. They are kneaded one at a time. Now the lechem hapanim were a total of 24 esronim divided by 12 comes out to 2 esronim per loaf. And we're saying here as well, niloshis achas achas. They were kneaded one at a time, v'nefel shtei, but baked 2 at a time. So meaning, what we did not do was, we did not knead all 24 isarons together, then divide them into 12. Nor did we divide 4 isarons together and then divide them in half and bake them together. The impression that I get was basically maybe you had 2 groups working simultaneously. Group Ruvain was working with 2 esronim to make a 2 isaron dough for 1 loaf, and Group Shimon was doing the same thing, working with another 2 esronim to make another dough for another loaf. And they would take the 2 doughs that were prepared by Group Reuven and Group Shimon, and they would be baked together in the oven, and then they would simultaneously, concurrently work on the next 2 loaves. That's how I understand it. So lechem hapanim nilosha achas achas, they are kneaded 1 loaf at a time, but v'nefel shtei, but you could bake 2 concurrently, 2 loaves concurrently. Uvidfus soya osa. Now, the shtei halechem, no, the lechem hapanim, I don't know about the shtei. I don't know about the shtei halechem. We didn't really talk much about the shape of the shtei halechem, though I did do a bunch. I did a bunch of research on this stuff. There was a lot of details here. I did some spelunking around. I saw somebody. There's some guy in Eretz Yisrael. I'm sure there's a lot of guys in Eretz Yisrael. They have these workshops for making the different menachos of the Beis Hamikdash. So you make the bread, the 40 loaves of atoda and the shtei halechem, lechem hapanim. So I think the shtei halechem also was kind of a bit of a unique shape. But anyways, I don't think we're really discussing that here. But the lechem hapanim, right? That was it. I'm nervous I'm going to be mixing up shtei halechem and lechem hapanim, by the way. I really hope I don't. But if I'm supposed to say like lechem hapanim and I say shtei halechem, you might be, if you're saying, hey, did he say the wrong thing? I might. So just keep that in mind. But it should be pretty clear what I'm supposed to be saying, though. So if I'm supposed to be saying lechem hapanim, which is probably what I am supposed to be saying, because that's really what we're going to focus on most of the time. If I'm supposed to say lechem hapanim and I say shtei halechem, and you're like, wait, did he just make a mistake? I might have, because it's confusing. Remember also that happened also with the shtei halechem and the kisbei atzeres or something, right? I had to write them out in big letters. Anyways, uvidfus aya osa osan. So the lechem hapanim would be made in a mold because they were a very unique shape, as we are going to discuss in soon. We're going to spend a lot of time discussing that shape. But it was made in a special mold in order to get the special shape. With fusay also osan kishu rodan, and when they would be taken out of the oven, nosan the defus, it would be put in another defus, in another mold, kadesh is calculus, that they don't get ruined. There's more to unpack there, but we'll unpack it in about 10 lines from now. We'll unpack that a little bit more. Okay, so that was the first Mishnah of Perek Shtei Halechem. We discussed that the Shtei Halechem are, each of the 2 loaves are kneaded separately and baked separately. The lechem hapanim, each loaf is kneaded separately but baked 2 at a time, and they were prepared and shaped in a mold. And we'll discuss more about that mold in a few minutes. I have some more honey today. I'm trying to really stamp out this sore throat or whatever throat. It's not really sore, but cough. I'm trying to stamp it out. So I'm trying to drink tea with honey. I think it's hopefully working a little bit. Okay. Says the Gemara, Minani Mile, how do we know that the lechem hapanim is baked one at a time, it is prepared one at a time, baked two at a time? Minani Mile, how do we know? So Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Shnei esronim, yeh achala achas. That each of the lechem hapanim, I don't know if I said shtei lechem. We're talking about the lechem hapanim right now. The lechem hapanim, the 12 showbreads, each of the 12 showbreads was 2 isarons each. So shnei esronim yeh achal achas. Each of the 12 showbreads, respectively, was 2 isarons. Melamed loshes achas achas. So we learn out from achala achas that each of the loaves was kneaded separately. You didn't knead a whole bunch of isarons of flour together and then divide it up into different doughs. Each loaf, each bread was kneaded individually. How do we know that the same thing by the shtei halechem, that the shtei halechem on Shavuos, the 2 breads, are also kneaded separately, each one being an isaron each, as opposed to the lechem hapanim, which were 2 isarons each. Each of the shtei halechem were 1 isaron respectively. Talmud Omer yeh. When it says shnei esronim yeh achala achas, I guess the point is yeh is extra. I guess it could have just said shnei esronim achala achas. Yeh is coming to include shtei halechem as well, that the shtei halechem is also needed one at a time. Uminayin she'af yoson shtayim shtayim. How do we know that the lechem hapanim are baked 2 at a time? Talmud Omer v'samta osam, that you will place them. That v'samta you will place. Place where? Place what? Well, what's the first placing? The first placing of the lechem hapanim would be in the oven. So when you initially place the lechem hapanim in the oven, it is osam. It is them. Plural. Minimum of plural is 2. So therefore you bake them 2 at a time. Yachol af shtei halechem kain. Is it possible that the shtei halechem as well can be baked 2 at a time? Talmud Omer osam. It says them. They, the lechem hapanim, are baked 2 at a time, not the shtei halechem. Hi, osam ha'afikta. 1 second. Didn't we already learn out from osam, v'samta osam, to teach that the lechem hapanim are baked 2 at a time? You can't also use osam in order to exclude the shtei halechem. Imkein lemekro v'samtom. My v'samta osam shas mina tarte. Well, if it was only teaching that the lechem hapanim are baked 2 at a time, and was not also excluding the shtei halechem, right? If it was only teaching that the lechem hapanim was baked 2 at a time, but it was not excluding the shtei halechem, well then it could just say v'samtom, and that would only teach me about the lechem hapanim. But it says v'samta osam, so it teaches 2 things. It teaches that the lechem hapanim are baked 2 at a time. It also teaches that the lechem hapanim, are baked 2 at a time. The shtei halechem, on the other end, 1 at a time. Givaldik. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, v'samta osam b'dfus. Okay, and you will place them in a dfus, in a mold. Shlosha dfus in heim. There are 3 molds. Nosno dfus v'adaini botzek. So you would put the dough in one mold when it was still a dough, and that way you would shape it in that initial mold. And there was a second mold that it would be baked in. So Rashi and the Chumash says that the mold that the lechem hapanim was baked in was what was made out of, I think, barzel. I think it was iron. So the mold that the lechem hapanim was baked in was made of barzel, was made of iron. The Rambam, however, says that all 3 molds were gold. Now, when you take the bread, when you take the lechem hapanim out of the oven, you would put it in a 3rd mold, so that it doesn't get ruined. Now, the lechem hapanim were baked not on Shabbos. It's a machlokes if the lechem hapanim were baked on Shabbos. We're going to get there within the next few days. However, let's assume that the lechem hapanim was baked on Friday before Shabbos. Now, they would then swap the lechem hapanim on Shabbos. On Shabbos, they would take out the lechem hapanim and it was eaten, and the new lechem hapanim would replace the previous lechem hapanim. So they would be swapped out on Shabbos, but they would be baked on Erev Shabbos. So we're saying that after they were taken out of the oven on Erev Shabbos, they would be put in this mold until they were ready to be put into the shulchan on Shabbos. And that way, shalot tischalkel, because if you remember from Daf Ches and Daf Tes of Masechta Menachos, if even one of the 12 loaves breaks, all of the loaves are possible, and you wouldn't burn the levona on the mizbeach, the frankincense, and you wouldn't eat them. So we need to make sure that the loaves remain intact. So after the loaves came out of the oven, they would be put in another mold in order to protect them until they were ready to be put on the shulchan. Now, Taka the Ramban on the Chumash, the Ramban points out that, and this is related, so let's actually read on one more line. It doesn't get ruined. Why don't you put it into the original? Right? Meaning we have an original defus that you shape it in, and then we had another defus mold that you baked it in. And we're saying that after the baking, you put it back. After the baking, you put it in a third mold. Why not just put it back in the first mold? So came the afila nafcha. Well, because the dough is different before it was baked than it is after it's baked, and the mold that was used before it was baked is no longer appropriate for the baked result, which has puffed up since it was initially shaped, and it needs a different mold. The Ramban ala Torah says that actually also the third mold served a different purpose than the first mold and the second mold. The first two molds, their purpose was to shape. Right, the first mold was to set the shape for the dough, and then the second mold it was baked in. But after it was baked, its shape was already had its shape. It was baked into its shape. So the role of the third mold was not to shape the bread, but actually really to preserve the shape of the bread. Therefore, it didn't need to be the exact shape of whatever the bread was going to be. It had to be a shape that would maintain the integrity. With the mold, its role would be to maintain the integrity of the shape of the bread, and whatever shape the mold had to be in order to do that. But the goal of it wasn't necessarily to shape the dough, and therefore it could have been shaped. Therefore, the mold could have been shaped differently than the first and second molds. Okay, and now we get to the very interesting. I don't even know how to describe this machlokas about the shape of the shtei halechem. I don't even know how to describe it. Technical, yes, it's technical. Interesting, yes, it's interesting. It's going to go in all sorts of different directions. It's going to bring up all. I guess it's more like it's like you let the cat out of the bag or whatever it's called, or like what's the phrase when something is like let out of the box or something, like you let this out of the box. I think it's like that, where it's like the Joker out of the box or the Jester out of the box. Is it a cat out of the hat? I don't know. There's some kind of phrase about okay, pop, we're popping. Here we go. It was stated, lechem hapanim, when it comes to the showbread. So from now on, we're talking about the showbreads. I don't think we're talking about the shtei halechem at all. So that should make things easier to the extent that if I say shtei halechem, you could be fairly confident that I meant lechem hapanim. Idmar lechem hapanim, when it comes to the showbreads, keitzad osin osa, how do you make it? What is the shape of the showbreads? Rabbi Chanina Omar kimin teva prutza. Rabbi Chanina says it is like an open box. Rabbi Yochanan Omar kimin sfina rokedes. It is like a fast-moving boat. Okay, what's this open box and what's this fast-moving boat? So let's actually look at Rashi. Rashi, right, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words or whatever it is. Rashi, in about 5 words, explains it very, very, I think, descriptively. So top Rashi on Saridal and Beis. What does it mean, like an open box? So this kind of an open box. Shenital kisuya, I'm imagining like a shoebox. First of all, by the way, to point out, I believe that the shape of the shtei halechem No, lechem hapanim. Lechem, the showbreads. The shape of the showbreads was essentially a square. It was essentially you know what? Let's actually, you know what? Oh boy, am I doing this now? Yeah, I'm doing this. Yeah, I'm doing this. Okay, I'm doing this. Okay, pulling up the first slide. Okay, the first slide. So this is a slide of the shulchan. This is a slide of the shulchan. This is the shulchan. This is the shulchan. What do we see in this slide? So, okay. Well, let's start with the red arrow. The red arrow, the pink arrow, is pointing to the showbreads, right? That's a stack of 6 showbreads. One stacked on one stacked up on the next. That is 6 showbreads. Don't worry about the shape of the showbreads yet. Now that is the a stack of 6 showbreads. Now there were 12 showbreads. Where's the other 6 showbreads? Well, if you notice that the shulchan itself, that whole big gold thingy, there are 2 stacks of 6 breads each. Okay, if you look at the white arrow is pointing to what I always forget its name. It is pointing to the snifin, which are these like panels of sorts. So the white arrow is pointing to these panels, right? There are like these 2 panels. Each panel is goes up to the height of one respected stack of breads. So basically, just like where the white arrow is pointing to this right panel, right, and that has 6 breads there, you can see stacked on top of each other. So next to it, there's also another stack of 6 breads. So those are the 12 breads. Now, the Torah says that the dimensions of the shulchan were 2 amas long and 1 amma wide. Okay, which means that the length, right? So there are 2 stacks, right? So the width of the 2 stacks was 2 amas long, which means that the width of each individual stack was 1 amma long, but also the width was 1 amma wide, right? Because it was 2 amos by 1 amma, but those 2 amas are for 2 stacks, which means that each stack was 1 amma by 1 amma. The point I'm making is that each bread, therefore, was 1 amma by 1 amma, right? If the table that was long enough to hold 2 stacks was 2 by 1, so then each stack would be 1 by 1, which is really what I wanted to say for now. I wanted to kind of show why I'm saying that the breads were 1 amma by 1 amma. I will also say, do I want to say this? No, not really. Yeah, it's enough for now, I think. It's enough for now. I don't need to say more than I need to. There's plenty on this stuff. Okay. So therefore, so therefore, we're talking about this box. Okay, so this box essentially is a square box. Essentially, is a square box. Yeah, whatever. Just in case anybody's going to say, "What? I thought that the showbreads were 10 tefachim long." There's a total of 10 tefachim long, but you have 5. It's a machlokas if it's 5 tefachim or 6 tefachim in the middle, and then what do you have left? So let's say it's 5 tefachim in the middle. So what you have left is 5 tefachim, but then we're talking about a box, so it has sides. So the sides are 2.5 tefachim each. So if you have 2.5 tefachim each for each side, so that's 5, and then you have the bottom is 5, right? And it's 5 wide, so it's going to be a square essentially. Okay, fine. That's a machlokas we're going to get to, I don't know, tomorrow, the next day, something like that. Now, okay, so let's get back to Rashi now. So k'minteva prutza shenita kisuya. So I'm imagining like a shoebox, okay? But as I said, it's not a rectangular shoebox; it's a square shoebox. Shenita kisuya that you're able to pull off the cover of the shoebox. It's the type of shoebox where the cover comes right off, not where it folds over. V'shtei daf nosea zo k'neged zo. V'shenital kisuya v'shtei daf nosea zo k'neged zo. So the top of the shoebox is removed, and also 2 opposite sides of the shoebox are also removed. So you have a shoebox that you remove the top and you remove 2 of its sides. So what are you left with? The bottom of the shoebox, and 2 of its sides remain as well. Kach halechem. Also the showbreads, haylo beis defanos had 2 walls, vishulaim rechava kazeh, right? It had 2 walls as well as a flat bottom. So now, I have here a photo of a shoebox. And in this shoebox, there is no lid, and I have X's by two opposite sides to say you could delete those two opposite sides. What are you left with? You're left with also you have to get rid of the shoes too. So you're left with a shoebox without any shoes in it, and with a flat bottom, and with the left wall and the right wall. That's what remains. A flat bottom and a left side and a right side. That is according to the opinion who says that the shape of the lechem hapanim of the showbreads is like an open box. I'm going to drink a little bit of tea. I had to remember what I'm drinking. Now, according to the opinion who says that the shape of the showbreads was like a fast boat, I think you're going to be a little bit surprised. I don't know, maybe you will, maybe you won't. Maybe you won't be surprised if it's called a freaking boat. Okay, this fast boat, it kind of looks like a canoe, basically. First of all, remember that I had said that the shape of the showbreads is square. Okay, so first of all, that shoebox is rectangular. It would have to be a square shoebox. And also this canoe is also long. Remember, it would be really square. It would be, you're going to have to pull out the sides to make it kind of really more of a rounder shape. But the point being that, first of all, this canoe has a flat bottom, which is why it's able to rest like that. We're talking about a pointy bottom, right? So if you actually look in Rashi, there is a shape there that's like a V, basically, right? With mamish like a pointed bottom. There are those who explain that the showbread's like that it's like a V. But I think from Rashi and from Tosfos and also from the diagrams in the art school, I'm not making this up from nowhere. The art school diagrams also really, it's like the hull of a boat. The hull is like the bottom section of a boat, and that is pointed at the bottom. So here in this canoe, it's flat, but what we're talking about is it comes to a V at the bottom. It's pointed at the bottom, but it's not just an open V because it's like a canoe where the ends are kind of pinched together. They come to a point at the end. Okay, so this fast boat, to me, it looks basically like a canoe. Although you would have to kind of, the adjustments you'd have to make is you have to like pull out the sides to make it more kind of rounder, because it's got to reach, it's basically it's square, right? So we'd have to pull out the sides to make it a bit wider, and also the bottom is pointy, it's not flat, okay? And the sides kind of come to a pinch. Okay, so those are basically the two options for the shape of the lechem hapanim, either like an open box or like a fast boat. So again, Rab Chanina Omar says, Rab Chanina kimin teva prutza, it's like an open box. Rabbi Yochanan Omar says, Rabbi Yochanan kimin sfina rokedes, it's like a fast boat. Okay. So basically the rest of the daf, basically, we're going to be throwing different questions. First, we're going to ask 3 questions against Rabbi Yochanan, against the opinion that says it's a fast boat, that it's like a canoe. And then we're going to ask some questions against the opinion that says that it's like an open box. So first, we start by challenging Rabbi Yochanan. So So I understand, according to the person who says it's like an open box, according to Rab Chanina, who says it's like an open box, Hainu dehavu yasve bazichin. Well, that's where the bazichin would be, right? Because the pasuk says, "V'nasata ala ma'areches livona zaka." They're going to put on top of the stack the bazichin, these like spoons that had frankincense in them. So if we go back to our picture of the shulchan, so the shulchan had these 2 stacks of showbreads. So now these showbreads on the shulchan are like the opinion who says that they are like an open box, right? So if it's an open box, so it says that you're going to put the levona ala ma'areches on top of the stack. So you take the spoon of levona and you go to the top of the stack and you place the spoon of levona on top of the stack. It's got a flat bottom, right? It's an open box. It's got a flat bottom. Just place it on the topmost bread. You'll put one bozoch on one stack and the second bozoch on the second stack. Now, to point out, this is also a machlokas. There's also a machlokas about, does al amareches mean like we described on top of the stack, or maybe al means next to the stack, and therefore it would actually be between the 2 stacks on the table. Now, another thing I want to point out, that where the blue arrow is pointing to, what the blue arrow is pointing to is pointing to the table itself. That's an important thing to point out, that The shulchan itself was literally a table. You see these like panels on the side, what the white arrow is pointing to, right? There's these 4 panels, one panel on either side of each of the stacks. So there's 4 of these panels. Those panels are a separate thing. We're going to see, according to one opinion, there might not even be those panels. If you remove those panels, what the blue arrow is pointing to, it was also literally just a table, right? As you could see, there was a table with 4 legs. Then there was a pole next to it. That I don't know that everybody agrees with this exact design, but there was a pole, and then you see these 2 separate panels. But if you remove the panels and remove the poles is of course how they would carry it, you would literally just have a table with stacks of bread on it. That's it. So why am I saying that there would be a table with stacks of bread on it? I think probably I can't remember. I think I was saying that because basically there's a table with 2 stacks of bread on it. So according to one opinion, the levona was not placed on top of the stacks, but rather in between the stacks on the table. Right? There was a table with 2 stacks, and in between the 2 stacks on the table, they would put the bazichin of the bazichin levona. However, we're assuming right now, like the opinion that says that the levona, the bazichin levona, was put on top of the stacks, and therefore we're saying, I understand according to the opinion who says that it was like an open box. Great, if it's an open box, you could put the bazichin levona inside of the open box. It's got a flat bottom. Elamando Omar Kimin Svina Rokedes, but according to the opinion who says that we're talking about a boat, like a fast boat, like a canoe, and we're talking about that, right? That it had a pointy bottom. Not that right. Our photo of a canoe has a flat bottom, but we're talking about that as a point. It comes to a point at the bottom. So where are you going to put the bazichin levona? There's no flat surface to put it on. It's a pointy surface. So the Gemara answers b'makom avadu. So the Gemara answers, you made a cute little nook in the wall. So you have the canoe, and it comes to a point at the bottom, but you would kind of make a little nook in the wall of the showbread to be able to hold the bazichin levona. Nish gefährlich, no big deal, nothing that we can't solve for. So according to the opinion according to Reb Chanina who says that it was a pointy bottom, it was a pointy bottom. Where did the bazichin levona go? Assuming that it goes on top of the stack. You would make you'd etch out, you'd make a cute little nook for the bazichin levona in the wall of the showbread. Not that big of a deal. But again, I understand according to the opinion who says that it is like a open box. That's where the reeds would go. But according to the opinion who says it's like a canoe, basically, where would the reeds go? Okay. So again, if we look at the shulchan once again, the gold arrow, what's the gold arrow pointing to? The gold arrow is pointing to that there were these reeds in between. If you'll notice, there were reeds in between each bread. Now, also, if you look at the white arrow is pointing to those panels. So if you look at the top half of the panels, so there are all these dots. What are all these dots? Those dots are like little grooves, grooves in the panels. And there are these reeds. There were 28 reeds divided by 2 stacks, so 14 reeds per stack. So there were six breads stacked up on each stack, which means that if there are 6 breads, then there are 5 spaces between the breads, right? Between 1 and 2, between 2 and 3, between 3 and 4, between 4 and 5, between 5 and 6. So there were 5 in between areas. Now, for the first 4 of those 5 in between areas, there were 3 reeds, and for the top in between area, there were 2 reeds. As you can count, if you want, you can count up those dots on the top part of the golden panel that the white arrow is pointing to, right? 3, 3, 3, 3, 2. Now, there would be reeds that would be in between the showbreads. Now, those reeds were not, so the reeds were also made of gold, right? They weren't just bamboo or something. They were made of gold. However, or at least they were covered in gold. I'd have to look I'd have to look. I don't know what the reeds were actually made of, but they were at least covered in gold. Now, those reeds were not shelves. They were not shelves, and we can't assume that they could hold, that they would be responsible for supporting the weight of the breads. That was not their role. And I get the impression that they weren't really securely held by those grooves in the panels. The role of these reeds was for ventilation, that there should be, right? Because the lechem hapanim were on the shulchan all week. They were on the shulchan all week. And we don't want them to get moldy. So the reeds in between the breads ensured ventilation. Their role was not as shelves to support the breads. Okay, now, so we're saying, going back to our open box and fast boat. So now, okay, so we had these reeds. We just discussed these reeds, that in between each of the breads, there were 6 breads stacked up, and in between each one, there were 3 reeds. The top one had 2 reeds. So I understand, according to the open box opinion, the reeds, as you could see here, I have these three red reeds. Okay, these 3 red lines, essentially. So when it's an open box, the reeds fit real easily, right? You have 3 reeds, and each reed can rest comfortably, right? Will be held comfortably. But right, you have these boxes. You have these breads. They're stacked on top of each other. Remember, the reeds they're not shelves. They're not supporting the breads. They're simply in between the breads, ensuring ventilation. So you have these 6 breads, these 6 boxes stacked on top of each other, and you have these 3 reeds in between each box bread, and each reed is able to rest on 2 walls of the box. So that's okay. I understand. You have these 3 reeds, you have these boxes. The 3 reeds can rest on the walls of the box. All good. But if you have this canoe shape, so the middle line, sure, there's plenty of width, plenty of girth for the reed to rest on in the middle, but at either end, it comes to a pinch. At either end, what is the reed resting on? There's not much for it to rest on if it just comes to a pinch at either end. So how do you understand then these reeds if you say that it's canoe shaped? So again, I understand if we say that it is a box, an open box. I understand where the reeds can rest. But if you say that it is like a canoe, it means a fast boat. I'm going to call it a canoe because that's really the shape that we're working with. In a amended canoe. A shiputzt canoe. But if it's like a canoe shape, so konim echi avu yazve, how are these reeds going to effectively be resting? Mursha avilu. Well, you add a little bit of extra dough to the pinches, enough dough that the reeds can rest comfortably. Also, once again, nish gefährlich. Once again, Bisham Alamanda Omar Kiminteva Prutza. I understand if you say that it's like an open box. Hainu desamche le snifin lechem. I understand why there are these panels for the bread. Elamanda Omar, this is tricky. Well, it's tricky to visualize. Elamanda Omar, I'm going to try my best. Elamanda Omar Kimin Svina Rokedes, but if you say it's like a canoe, Hechi samchi le snifin lechem, how were the panels supporting the bread? The answer is that they are made round. Okay, this is tricky. This is tricky. Okay, the first part isn't tricky. The open box part is not tricky. The canoe part is tricky. Okay, so let's do the open box part first. So getting back to our classic shulchan photo, I'm going to take some more tea. Got to make sure my throat isn't drying out. Okay. Going back to our classic shulchan. Now, the white arrow is pointing to these panels. There were 4 of these panels, these snifim. And these panels, there were one on either side of each stack of the lechem hapanim. One to the left, one to the right, and there were 2 of these stacks, 4 of these panels. Now, if you look at this, you see, on this version of the, what we see in this photo, the poles are between the shulchan, the actual table, and these panels. My impression is that I don't know what opinion that is, but I'm going to assume that there are certainly other illustrations where the poles are on the outside of the panels, which I think makes more sense for the following reason. So right now you see that it looks like there's like, and I imagine there is some space because the poles are in between, but what it looks like on this image is that there's space in between the panels and the bread, which means that the panels aren't actually providing much support for the breads because they're not flush with the breads. But let's assume not like exactly like this image. Rather, get rid of those poles and get those panels flush against the side of the breads. So that being the case, you have these 6 showbreads. If they're like boxes, which they are like in this image. Now you might also, by the way, be wondering, why are they folded over on the sides? It's a good question. I don't know if there's some opinion that says, meaning if you look at the showbreads in this image, there's a flat bottom, there's walls, but then it also almost like closes-ish on top. I don't know if that's just like some version of Rashi and Tosfos or something, or if that's some other opinion. I don't know. It might just be that that's just how the mold left it. I don't know. I don't know where that shtickle comes from. Maybe we'll learn about it in the next few days. I don't know. But anyways, if you're wondering, I'm wondering too. But I'll upon it. This seems to be the box version, okay? So you have these 6 breads that are stacked one on top of the other. Now remember, as I said earlier, if even one of the breads breaks over the course of the week, then nobody's eating any of the showbreads and we're not going to burn the frankincense. The breads get ruined. So we really do want to make sure that they are supported as best as possible. So I understand, according to opinion, that they are boxes. You have those panels. The panels are flush against these breads. These breads have sides, and they're stacked on top of each other. And the panels are basically providing support for the sides that they shouldn't, fall over, right? The sides, at least certainly not outwards, because you have these panels that are flush against the walls to keep them from at least bending outwards. So I understand if you say that the breads were like this box and they had flat walls, they had straight vertical 90-degree walls, and the panels are able to provide support by hugging them on the outside. But if you say that it is like a canoe and that they have pointy bottoms, well, really they're only coming out and extending towards the sides of the shulchan at the top, right? As the right, you have this pointy bottom, and it kind of tapers outward as it goes up, and therefore these panels aren't really providing it much support. It's really only touching the side of the shulchan, or the side of like these panels really at the top of the bread. It's not really providing much support for the walls really, because the walls taper, and they taper to a point at the bottom. So if that's the case, these panels aren't really providing much support. So that's the question. So the Gemara asks, I understand if you say that we're talking about a box with 90-degree walls, I understand then how the panels are able to offer support. But if you say that the breads were canoe-shaped and that they tapered to a point at the bottom, the panels aren't really providing that much effective support. So this is going to be tricky. The Gemara answers. The Gemara says, no big deal, I have an answer for you. The answer is a bit tricky to visualize. The art school had some images. It took me a while just to figure out what I was even looking at. I still don't really know what I'm looking at. I'm not even 100% sure that I'm explaining this correctly. I will make my arguments for why I am explaining it correctly. That's the best I could say. So, what are we looking at here? Sheesh. On the left image, what we're looking at is, obviously that's not a shulchan. I don't know what it is. I typed in, I don't know, probably like a stack of trays or something. So this is some kind of stack of trays in the image on the left. Now, Now, that's obviously not the shulchan, and it's obviously 3 stacks. The shulchan would have 2 stacks, and it's also, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 stacks, and we only need 6 tall. This is not the shulchan, but it is a stack of trays. 1 stack on top of the other. Now, if you notice, there's no panels here, right? In our photo of the shulchan, there were panels on either side. There's no panels here. There's just stacks, and those stacks are trays. Those are not meant to be the lechem hapanim. The lechem hapanim are these canoe-shaped things that are somehow stacked on each other. How are they stacked on each other? Well, okay, so if you look at this thing that I made on the right, sorry that I'm really gonna have to walk you through this because it's not obvious what you're looking at. But basically, the green thing is meant to be a canoe, and I actually pulled out the side so that it was rounder. Right, the canoe is longer. This is rounder. It comes to a point, pinches to a point at the ends. Now, the green is our flat, one-dimensional, canoe-shaped lechem hapanim. Obviously, in real life, it would be deeper and come up taller and be like an actual canoe that you could sit in, right? Although we're talking about a little bread, you can't actually sit in a bread. Okay. Now, what the blue on the outside, those are two separate pieces, okay? And those are actually our panels, or whatever I was calling them, right? Right? Remember, on the shulchan, there were these 2 panels, one on either side of the stack of bread. Here we don't have those panels. Rather, we have a stack of 6 of these canoes, but the canoes come to a point at the bottom. They'll fall over. They're not sturdy. Rather, what the blue things on either side of the canoe are, basically, those are 2 separate pieces, one on either side of the canoe, and they would prop up the canoe to hold it, to cradle it and hold it snug. And basically, you would have a canoe-shaped bread, and on the right side of it, it would be cradled by a kind of little piece, and on the left side, it would be cradled by an identical, symmetrical piece. And it would be cradled to a point at the bottom and kind of taper up, and it would hold it nicely. And there were 2 separate pieces, one on the right side, one on the left side, and it would cradle the canoe, and it would be the perfect shape to be able to hold it. And that would be one of the breads. And then the next bread would also be on top of it with its cradle. And all these 6 breads were stacked up, one on top of the other. And you had these 6 breads, and they were canoe-shaped. They came to a point at the bottom. How did they not all fall over? Because they were being cradled. Each one of the canoe-shaped breads was being cradled on its right side and on its left side by these two separate pieces, one piece on its right, one piece on its left, and it cradled the canoe-shaped bread beautifully. And what were these snifim, right? Because the Mishnah on Daf Vav says that those panels that we were looking at the classic shulchan with the lechem hapanim, the gold one, the Mishnah on Daf Vav says that there were these 4 panels. So where are the 4 panels if we're saying that there weren't 4 panels? The 4 panels are that this stack. This is how I'm understanding it. I could be totally wrong, but I'm going to make my argument for why I'm saying what I'm saying. I'm not just saying it out of nowhere. I have a reason for saying what I'm saying. But anyways, those 4 panels from the golden mizbeach that we're looking for, they're gone. They're not here. What are the 4 panels then? Well, each stack of 6 canoes has on its right side, it's being cradled on its right side. So the right cradles for each of the 6 breads are stacked on top of each other. And that, basically, if you look back at the photo here, on the left side, you look at these stacks, and basically, it creates like a wall. Each stack is creating like a wall on its right, and a wall on the other side of it, which we don't see in this photo. But basically, right, those walls that you're seeing, those stacks are not the showbreads, right? According to the opinion that it's a box, right, like a box, so you would see the actual breads stacked up. You know, you'd have the panels on the outside, but if you didn't have the panels, you would see stacks of breads. Here, they're not going to be stacks of breads because the breads are canoe-shaped and they're awkward, but they're being cradled on either side. So what you're actually looking at is the stack of the cradles. And the stack of the cradles, one on top of the other, so you have 6 cradles stacked on top of each other, that is our panel. That is our panel on the right side. And on the left side, there was also other pieces stacked, other cradles stacked on top of each other, and collectively they formed the left panel, right? So basically the cradles stacked on top of each other on the right created one panel, and the cradles stacked up on each other stacked on each other on the left created the second panel, and that was for one of the stacks of bread. And then you had also for the second stack of 6 breads. So you basically had each stack had 2 panels, right? One panel of 6 cradles and another panel of 6 cradles on the other side. And then you had the same thing for the next 6 breads. Why am I saying this? Why am I arguing what I'm arguing? And it could be it's not such a chiddush. It could be it's just, I think it's Pshat and Rashi. I didn't really see it anywhere, and this whole thing is confusing, which is why I'm like trying to make a mahalach here, kind of working with what I have the best that I can. So, and I did my work. I don't know if you could tell. I put the time in. I looked at the Steinsaltz. There was no images of this. I looked at the art scroll. There were images. They were very difficult to understand. In the Gemara itself, there are images. Usually, you don't want to rely on those. But anyways, why am I saying what I'm saying? I'm saying what I'm saying because I'm going to read Rashi to you, and you could tell me what you think, or maybe you could find somebody who explains Rashi differently, and I would be very happy. But I'm working with what I have. Rashi says, I'm going to read you Rashi. Do'agalumi agel. Eina snifin omdin skufin. You don't have, according to the opinion that we're talking about the canoe, you don't have the panels like we saw on the golden shulchan, that there are these 2 panels standing straight, supporting the walls of the open box breads. No, you don't have that. Eina snifin omdin skufin. We don't have these straight standing panels when it comes to the canoe-shaped version. Ella, rather, asum kechatzi maigel, rather you have this half circle on one side, shakor and tzidka, kazev, also eagle, tacha shipuo shalechem, and that, so basically, again, so you didn't have these like these just vertical panels. Rather, what were these panels? Rather, they were half circles, right? Like you can see in these half circle molds that were supporting the canoe. Where am I? Right, but also eagle, and that half circle, tachas shipuo, would be under, right? The canoe was tapered, and this kind of half circle on the right, let's say, would taper with the shape of the canoe. Shel lechem v'somech es kol halechem, and it hugs and it cradles and it supports the entire unique canoe shape of the lechem, of the bread. V'rosh asanif, and the top of the cradle, when it gets to the top of the bread, somech l'rosh halechem, is supportive of the top of the bread. Basically, you had this piece there that was supportive and cradling the entire canoe shape of the bread. So then what was the snifim? What were these stacks? If we're saying, right, Rashi literally said, Ein asnifim omdim skufin. You don't have these panels that are just standing straight. Rather, you have these half circles that are cradling and they're stacked up on each other, and that stack is what creates the snif. That is how I understand it. Pretty requires a lot of working through, but I hope it makes sense, and I hope that I was able to communicate the way I'm seeing it. It's very difficult to communicate it. You need like 3D kind of stuff here. Okay, I hope that I effectively was able to describe, and combination of descriptions and words and images, hopefully together we're able to describe something useful. So now again, I'm going to read that again. Amar kimin teva prutza. So I understand if you say that it's like an open box. Hanu de samchele snifin la lechem. So right. So that is where you have the panel, right? That's you have the panels, as we said. You have the shulchan. You have if they're like open boxes and they have 90-degree walls and they're stacked one on top of the other, and you then have these panels that are snug against the walls of the breads to ensure that they don't fold outwards, and they can support them that way. I get it. But if they're canoe shaped and they come to and they're pointy at the bottom, they taper to a point at the bottom. How would those panels be supportive of the tapered sides of the breads? So to agel le me'agel, that well, the snifim, these panels were really more like cradles. You write each bread would have these two cradles, one on each side of it, one to the right, one to the left, and they would cradle each bread, and they were stacked up on each other, and collectively the stack would create the snifim. Right from the outside, it would basically look like there was a wall of these cradles, and that were the snifim. You had one on either side of the stack of breads, and there were two stacks of these breads for basically four of these wall type things. Now, that was three questions that were asked on the opinion that says it was an open box. What about according to the opinion who says that it was a canoe? Wait, what? I don't know what I just said. We just asked three questions on the... Wait, what? Delete the last 30 seconds. I don't know what I said. We just asked three questions in support of the opinion that it was an open box against the canoe opinion. We are now going to do the opposite. We are going to ask, I believe, two questions in support of the canoe opinion against the open box opinion. Now, I understand if we're talking about the canoe, well, that's why we need these cradles, these snifim, right? We just went from saying, I understand the open box, how these panels are being supportive of the walls. I don't understand how that would work with the canoes. We then gave a very interesting answer about how actually the snifim were actually cradles that were cradling and supporting the canoes. So now we're saying, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. I understand why that's necessary, because according to the canoe version, they were tapered to a point at the bottom. You can't stack them on top of each other. That's why you need these cradles. You need these snifim, which were these cradles that were supporting them in order to help them be stacked one on another. But at the end of the day, if it's a box with walls, why do you bichlal need the panels? Just stack them up one on top of the other. They have walls. So agav yukur de lechem tlach. No, you need those, what was I calling them? Snifim. You need those panels because again, it's super important that we preserve the integrity of these breads, because if they break, then if even one of them breaks, the whole thing is puzzled. So therefore, because of the weight of the breads, now these were, you can find in it, I didn't actually get an image of these were big breads. These are not matzahs that we have on Pesach, that you just, get a whole stack of matzahs and they're not going to break. No, these were big breads. So, I don't know, there were two isarons. An isaron is, an ephah is 432 eggs. An isaron is 43.2 eggs. And there were two isarons, so they were of flour. So that was 43.2 times 2 is 86.4. That was 86.4 eggs. 86, did I do the math right? My brain is starting to get a little weak. This is intense stuff. Wow, what do we call that? The friends, what do we call it when mush, push through the mush? Remember that? We haven't had to push through the mush in a while. I think my brain's getting a little better, which is nice. Anyways, I had a feeling that this whole Babble on Talmud thing would be good for my brain, be good brain exercise. How's your brains doing? Has your brains gotten stronger too over the past 6 years? Now, what were we saying? So much for my brain. What were we saying? I don't know. The breads. Nachon. 43.2 times 2 should be, I think, 86.4. So 86.4, that's a lot of eggs. I mean, imagine a dozen eggs and you multiply that like a few times. That's a lot. It's like, it's probably close to 8 dozen eggs? Let's see. 12 times 8. 96 times 7 is 84. So it's somewhere between 7 and 8 dozen eggs. That's a lot of eggs per loaf. Meaning that's the amount of flour. These are big loaves. So therefore, if we just stack them one on top of the other, we're nervous that they could break. If they break, Chava. We can't eat any of them. Don't burn the frankincense. So therefore, even though yes, technically speaking, you can stack them on top of each other. However, we do want the added support to make sure that they're not going to break outwards. Okay. So agabuk of the lechem tlach, they could break. Once again, I understand if you say that it's canoe shaped. Snifin al gabi shulchan munachit. Okay. Now, if we say that they are canoe-like, and it was a stack of these cradled on top of each other. So you basically have these stacks, and you could just, right? If you let's go back to our photo for a second of these stacked trays. You can basically have these stacked trays, which in our case would be these stacked cradles. Put them down on the shulchan, right? If you remember, let's go back now to our golden shulchan. The blue arrow is pointing to the fact that it was just a regular table. And on the table were stacked these breads. And if we say that the breads were the canoe shaped, and they were cradled by these cradles, and you could just stack them right on top of each other. So you have the table, you could stack them right on the table. Ella, Lamanda Omar, Kiminteva Prutza, but if we say that they're like boxes, now we could look at the golden shulchan over here. If we say that they're like boxes, well then these panels, they were standing on the floor. They weren't the snifin. They were not resting on the table. They were standing on the floor. Snifin heicha manachlu. Where were these panels? A'ara manachlu. Were they standing on the floor and not on the actual table? Yes, they were standing on the floor. The Omer Abba Bar Mamo says Abba Bar Mamo the Divra Omer Kamin Sfino Rakedes Snifin Agabi Shulchan Munachin. That according to the opinion who says that they are canoes and they are being cradled on either side, they would just be stacked up directly on the table. The Divra Omer Kamin Teva Prutza, and according to the opinion who says that they were like these open boxes and the breads were stacked on top of each other on the table. However, snifin, the panels, were hugging them from the outside and would be resting on the floor, like you can see in this photo. That the white arrow is pointing to one of the panels, and you can see it's just standing on the floor. Snifin al gabi karka munachin, the panels were resting on the floor. Kaman azla ad Amr Rabbi Yehuda, like whom does what Rabbi Yehuda say go like who, right? Rabbi Yehuda says halechem ma'amir esa snifim, that the bread supports the snifin, in our case the cradles. The snifin ma'amidin es halechem, and the cradles cradle the bread. Kaman the Amar kimin sfina rokedes, like Rabbi Yochanan who says that they are canoe-like, and therefore the canoe, I guess, rests on the cradles and holds the cradles in place, and the cradles are also supporting the canoe-shaped breads as well. Meisvei, we have a contradiction. Kimin kaveres ayla betanu, that while the showbreads were baking in the oven, they were in a basket. Vidoma kimin tavla, and it was merubas. It's like a square tablet, i.e., it has a flat bottom. So that is going to be supportive of the opinion of Reb Chanina, who says that it was like an open box, because that had flat. We're saying it was like a tablet that had a flat bottom. Ema ufia dome kimin tavla merubas. No, say that at the top of it, at its opening, the opening of the canoe, it was like a square tablet, as we said, right? It kind of right. It's not thin like a canoe. It's really wider, and where at the top of the bread, where it's widest, it would be, I guess, more tablet-like. So Tanya, we learn in a brayse, Commander Omar Kimin Svina Rokedes. We have a brayse supporting the opinion who says that it is like a canoe. The Tanya that we learn in the brayse, Arba Snifim Shelzov. There were these 4 kind of panels of gold, which, remember, if you're saying that it's canoe-like, the way I'm explaining it, these panels were basically these stacks of cradles. Right, the cradles would be stacked on top of each other, creating like a kind of wall. So these 4 wall stacks, Hayusham, were there, Mufutsalin, Miroshem, and they were grooved, they were notched at the top, which is where those reeds that would serve for ventilation would be notched into. Kimin dakronin, they were like these split reeds. Hayu she somchin ben es halechem, and the cradles support the bread, and that the breads are like these canoes, they are like these fast boats. So here we have a brisa specifically mentioning these canoes, specifically mentioning these fast boat shapes. Friends, we're going to end it there. Sheesh, that was some daf. Cheva, I hope that I tried my best. I tried to present this daf as best as I could. I hope that we walk away with useful stuff, with understanding. That, you know what, let's get to what we should walk away with in a second. We'll do a wrap up and a conclusion. Okay, on Daf Tzadi Daled, Daf 94 of Masechta Menachos, we learned about baking the shtei lechem and the lechem hapanim. Now, this right now we're talking about baking them, not the shapes of anything, but baking the shtei lechem, the lechem hapanim. So the shtei lechem was kneaded and baked one at a time. You kneaded 1 isaron of flour, and then you baked it. After it was kneaded, you baked it. That was 1 shtei lechem. It was chametz, of course. And then you would do the same for the second loaf. That was for the shtei lechem. For the lechem hapanim, you kneaded them one at a time. Each bread was 2 isarons, right? 86.4 eggs worth of flour. So the lechem hapanim, so you kneaded them one at a time. Each one was 2 isarons, but you would basically knead 2 simultaneously. That's how I understand it. You basically have 2 groups kneading each bread, each dough simultaneously, and then they would be baked 2 at a time. You would put 2 in the oven at the same time. There were 3 molds, 1 for shaping, 1 for baking, and 1 for post-bake. We saw that the Rambam says that all 3 were gold. Rashi on the Chumash says that the one that it was baked in, I believe he said was barza, was iron. We also said that according to the Ramban, the one that was used post-baking was really just to preserve the shape until it was put into the shulchan. It didn't necessarily need to be the same shape as the mold, as molding the shape per se. It really just had to preserve the shape that was it was baked into. Now, we got into the shape of the lechem hapanim. We saw a machlokas between Rabbi Chanina, who says that the shape of the lechem hapanim is like an open box, and Rabbi Yochanan says that the shape is like a fast boat, which is kind of canoe-like. Okay, as I was saying a minute ago, what should we walk away through that sort of intensive exploration of the shapes of the lechem hapanim? Well, we should simply walk away with what we just said. The Rabbi Chanina says that one opinion of the shape of the lechem hapanim was like this open box shape. The other opinion is Rabbi Yochanan, who says it was like this canoe. But we also learned a lot about the shulchan as well. Some important things that we should take with us about the shulchan, right? And that was that there was this table, and on the table there were stacked up breads. Now, we had a big kind of deep dive about these kind of snifim, these panels, that there were these 4 snifim on the shulchan. And we saw this machlokas, which I hope I understood correctly. If anybody has any other insight, please let me know. But sort of according to the opinion, it says that the breads were stacked like an open box. So then these snifim, these 4 panels, were literally these 4 90-degree panels that were resting on the ground straight, that would go straight up, and they were supportive of the walls of these boxes. But if you say that they were that the breads were canoe-like, so actually they weren't these like walls that came up from the ground to be supportive. Rather, they were on either side of this canoe-shaped bread that came to a taper at a point at the bottom. On either side of each loaf was kind of a support that was cradling it, and those would be stacked on top of each other, creating a sort of wall on either side of the bread, and therefore each stack had a wall, a sort of kind of stack, a wall stack on either side of the loaf, and you had 2 of these stacks, and you would have basically like kind of 4 of these stacked cradles, of half cradles, kind of, that would be on either side of the a half cradle on either side of the bread, fully cradling it. Friends, I hope you got what I meant. Together with the cradle on either side, the bread was fully cradled. Now, friends, that was Daf Tzadi Daled, Daf 94 of Masechta Menachos. I hope you enjoyed this very, very unique and interesting daf. Cheers.